Welcome, dairy enthusiasts, to another exciting episode of the Bullvine Podcast. I'm Bella, and with me is the one and only Douglas. Thank you for joining us for our 179th episode. Today we're diving into a topic that's hotter than a cow in July: CRISPR gene editing and its potential impact on dairy farming.
That's right, Bella. We're about to take a wild ride through the brave new world of gene-edited livestock. From muscular Polo ponies to heat-resistant Holsteins, this technology is set to shake up our industry faster than you can say automated milking system. And we're not talking small potatoes here. We're looking at a potential $100 billion upheaval in the dairy industry.
Wow. Douglas, that sounds fascinating. But before we dive in, can you give our listeners a quick overview of what we'll be covering today?
Sure thing, Bella. We'll start with those gene-edited Polo horses in Argentina that kicked off this whole conversation. Then we'll explore how CRISPR could revolutionize dairy farming, from creating heat-resistant cows to tackling disease resistance. We'll also look at the regulatory landscape, including the AGRI-TECH Act in the U.S., consumer perceptions, and the challenges small farms might face. And of course, we'll wrap up with some thoughts on what this all means for the future of dairy farming.
That sounds like quite the journey. Let's saddle up and get started. Douglas, tell us about these super Polo ponies that have everyone talking.
Well, Bella, picture this. 5 frisky foals prancing around a fancy stable in Buenos Aires, looking like they've been hitting the equine gym 24/7. These aren't your typical blue-blooded ponies. They're the world's first CRISPR-edited horses, created by a company called Kheiron Biotech.
CRISPR-edited horses? That sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie. How exactly does that work?
It's actually quite fascinating. The scientists at Kheiron Biotech used CRISPR gene editing technology to tweak a gene called MSTN, which controls muscle growth. Essentially, they gave it a little nudge, and voila, you've got Polo ponies that could give Arnold Schwarzenegger a run for his money.
Polo ponies with six-packs? Now that's something I'd like to see. But seriously, what can these super horses do?
According to the data from Kheiron Biotech, these CRISPR-edited ponies can sprint 15% faster than their non-edited buddies. And get this, they achieve this without adding a single drop of artificial DNA. It's all just clever editing of the horse's existing genes.
That's impressive. But I can't help wondering, is this all just for show, or could it have real applications for our industry?
That's the $100 billion question, Bella. If scientists can edit horse genes to create the perfect polo player, how long before they're tinkering with Bessie's DNA to produce heat-resistant super cows or disease-proof milk machines?
Now that's something our listeners will want to hear more about. But before we dive into the dairy applications, are there any concerns about these gene-edited horses?
Well, as with any new technology, there are some worries. Some folks are concerned that these speed demons might burn out faster than a cheap tractor. Endurance could be an issue. That's why Argentine vets are watching these ponies more closely than a fox in a henhouse, monitoring every snort, gallop, and tail swish.
That makes sense. It's important to ensure the animal's well-being. Now let's turn our attention to dairy. How could CRISPR technology impact our herds?
Bella, this is where things get really exciting for us dairy folk. CRISPR has the potential to address some of our biggest challenges, starting with heat stress.
Heat stress? You mean like when the cows get too hot in summer?
Exactly. Climate change is turning our dairy barns into saunas, and not the fun kind where you lose water weight. But CRISPR might be dairy's new best friend. Scientists are working on introducing something called the slick gene into dairy cattle.
The slick gene. Sounds cool, pun intended. What does it do?
Good one, Bella. The slick gene is like nature's thermostat. It's borrowed from those chill Senepol cattle who treat heat waves like a day at the beach. When introduced into dairy breeds, it could lead to up to 10% higher milk production during heat waves.
Wow, that could make a big difference for farmers in hot climates. Are there any other benefits?
You bet. It's 100% natural genetic modification. No Frankencows here, just speedy evolution. And the best part? Zero added electricity costs. Your wallet stays as fat as your heifers.
That sounds amazing, but surely there must be a catch.
Well, CRISPR isn't just about beating the heat. Scientists are also working on disease resistance. They're targeting something called the CD46 gene, which could help reduce our reliance on antibiotics by 20 to 30%.
That's significant. Antibiotic use is a big concern in our industry. But Douglas, all this sounds almost too good to be true. Are there any potential downsides or risks we should be aware of?
You're right to ask that, Bella. While CRISPR holds a lot of promise, it's not without its challenges. Remember the hornless cattle situation a few years back?
Hornless cattle. I'm not sure I do. Can you refresh our listeners' memory?
Sure thing. A while back, scientists used gene editing to create hornless cattle, aiming to reduce injuries in the herd. Sounds great, right? But they accidentally introduced antibiotic-resistant genes in the process. It's a reminder that we need to be careful and thorough with this technology.
That's a bit worrying. How can we ensure we don't make similar mistakes with CRISPR?
Well, as Dr. Emily Park, a geneticist at UC Davis, puts it, it's like baking. Rush the process and you'll end up with a mess. Genetic precision isn't something you want to speed date. We need to take our time and be thorough in our research and testing.
Douglas, all this technology sounds amazing, but I can't help wondering about the regulations. How are different countries handling CRISPR?
Seriously, that's a great question, Bella. The regulatory landscape is about as varied as a herd of Holsteins. Take Argentina, for example. They're doing the CRISPR cha-cha like it's going out of style. Their motto, if it ain't foreign DNA, it ain't GMO. Their biotech regulatory body, CONABIA, is practically high-fiving farmers left and right.
And what about other countries?
Well, the European Union is doing a much more cautious waltz. They're eyeing CRISPR like it's a bull in a china shop. And here in the good old US of A, we've got the AGRI-TECH Act of 2023 causing more farmer head-scratching than a case of lice in the herd.
The AGRI-TECH Act? What's that all about?
Well, according to a Farm Journal survey in 2023, about 65% of dairy farmers say the bill needs more clarity. It's proposing some subsidies, which sounds nice, but without clarity, it's like being handed a blank check you can't cash. Farmer confidence in the bill is lower than a snake's belly in a wagon rut.
That sounds complicated. How are farmers dealing with all this uncertainty?
It's not easy, Bella. Take Luisa Moreno, for example. She's an Argentine dairy co-op manager, and she says, "You know what keeps me up at night? We're investing millions in slick cattle, but Europe might decide tomorrow that our milk is more controversial than pineapple on pizza."
I can see why she'd be worried. Now, I'm sure our listeners are wondering about the practical aspects of all this. How much would it cost for a farmer to get involved with CRISPR technology?
Well, Bella, you might want to sit down for this. According to AgriPulse, a single CRISPR-edited embryo could cost anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000. And that's not including the licensing fees, which could be 5 to 10% of the offspring's revenue.
That's a lot of money. How could small farms possibly afford that?
That's the big question, isn't it? Jake Larson, a dairy farmer from Wisconsin, put it this way. "My granddad traded 3 heifers for his first tractor. Today, that same deal would barely cover the cost of gene editing technology for a single calf."
That's a sobering thought. It sounds like this technology could create a real divide between large and small farms.
You're not wrong, Bella. It's not just the cost either. According to a study by Cornell University, only 15% of U.S. dairy farmers say they fully understand gene editing. That's fewer people than can explain why cats always land on their feet.
So, we're looking at both a financial barrier and a knowledge gap. That's concerning, but surely there must be some solutions being proposed.
Actually, there are some interesting initiatives in the works. For example, Brazil has launched an open CRISPR program that's making some gene patents publicly available. Small farmers can access certain non-patented genes for reduced fees.
That sounds promising. Are there any other innovative approaches?
Yes, there are. Australia is taking a two-pronged approach. They're researching heat-resistant cattle, which ties into what we discussed earlier about the SLIC gene. But they're also working on methane-reducing feed additives. It's a great example of using CRISPR technology to address climate change from multiple angles. And get this, there's even a system called AGRI-TECH that's using blockchain technology to track CRISPR milk from cow to consumer.
Impressed. Blockchain for milk. Now that's something I never thought I'd hear.
You're not alone there, Bella. But it's a great example of how we're combining cutting-edge technologies to address some of the concerns around CRISPR. Consumers can scan QR codes to see where their milk came from, and probably what the cow had for breakfast.
Speaking of consumers, how are they reacting to all this? Are they ready for CRISPR milk?
Well, Bella, consumer reactions are mixed. According to a study by IFIC and Eurobarometer in 2023, about 52% of Americans are cautiously optimistic about CRISPR technology in agriculture. They're saying things like, if it helps Bessie, we're on board.
That doesn't sound too bad. What about the rest of the world?
In Europe, the reception is a bit cooler. The same study found that 33% of Europeans say they need more information before deciding. And let me tell you, marketing departments are sweating bullets trying to figure out how to navigate these choppy waters.
I can imagine. It sounds like there's a real need for consumer education around this technology. But Douglas, we can't ignore the elephant in the room, or should I say, the lab-grown protein in the petri dish. How does CRISPR technology compare to these new alternative dairy products we're hearing about?
Good point, Bella. While we've been scratching our heads over CRISPR, some tech whizzes in Silicon Valley have been busy playing Dr. Frankenstein with bacteria. Companies like Perfect Day are engineering microbes to make milk proteins.
Milk from bacteria. Now I've heard everything. How big is this market?
It's no joke, Bella. The market value for these alternative dairy products is estimated at $2.1 billion. That's billion with a... You've got to be kidding me.
That's a significant figure. It sounds like traditional dairy farmers are facing challenges from all sides. What's your take on all this, Douglas? Where do you see the industry heading?
Well, Bella, I think we're at a crossroads. CRISPR technology offers some amazing possibilities. Heat-resistant cows, disease-resistant herds, potentially higher milk production with fewer resources. But it also comes with significant challenges. High costs, regulatory hurdles, consumer skepticism, not to mention competition from lab-grown alternatives.
It's certainly a lot to consider. Any final thoughts for our listeners?
Here's what I think, Bella. We can't afford to sit this one out. Climate change is breathing down our necks like an impatient heifer at feeding time. Disease resistance could slash our antibiotic use, making our herds and our bottom lines healthier. If we don't jump on this CRISPR train, we might find ourselves left behind at the station, watching as lab-grown milk takes over the market.
Those are some strong points, Douglas. So what should farmers do?
First and foremost, stay informed. Knowledge is power, and in this case, it might just be the difference between thriving and barely surviving. Be adaptable. Our ancestors went from hand milking to machines. We can handle this. And don't be afraid to collaborate. Pool resources, share knowledge. We're stronger together than alone in this genetic rodeo.
That's great advice, Douglas. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up. Listeners, we hope this episode has given you some food for thought about the future of dairy farming. Remember, CRISPR technology is complex and controversial, but it's also utterly fascinating.
Utterly fascinating? Was that a cow pun, Bella?
Maybe. But in all seriousness, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic. Are you ready to ride the CRISPR wave, or are you sticking with traditional breeding for now?
Yes, please do reach out and let us know what you think. And remember, whether you're Team CRISPR or Team Traditional, one thing's for sure, the future of farming is going to be one wild ride. So buckle up, Buttercup.
That's all for this episode of the Bullvine Podcast. I'm Bella, and on behalf of Douglas and myself, thanks for listening. Until next time, may your milk be plentiful and your cows be happy.